Great to see so many people excited about multi-chain dev tools. So, me personally, I think I'm really happy to chat about that because, you know, multi-chain has really changed from a thesis like 4 years ago to reality now. So we have all these optimistic rollups having launched. We have many L1 which are EVM compatible and have really traction by now. And soon we'll also have the CK rollups launching. And I'm really excited to see how developers who build dev tools, but also who build dApps, change their thinking with these changed environments. And personally, as a PM at Celo, which is an EVM compatible L1, I've had hands-on experience with transferring dApps from different ecosystems within EVM worlds. And it's actually not that easy. And the dev tooling world has still way to go. So with that, I'm super happy to have all these experts on stage with me. And yeah, Bogdan, you're building Tenderly, and you're also deploying on many chains. Maybe you can give us a quick overview how your product helps people deploy and maintain their smart contracts on different layer ones and twos.
L2 side cheese, like all of the things. So hi everyone, my name is Bogdan. I'm one of the co-founders of Tenderly. Okay, sorry. Can you hear me now? So my name is Bogdan. I'm one of the co-founders of Tenderly. So we're a blockchain developer platform, which means literally nothing at this point because everyone says the same thing. But what this actually means is that we have a bunch of tools and services that help developers be more productive. So debugging, profiling, alerting, infrastructure, simulations, nodes, like a bunch of different things. But when we started working on Tenderly, our thought, and this 4 years ago was a very unpopular opinion, was that there's going to be multiple chains, and everybody was an Ethereum main at Maxi at that point. But we thought that the EVM is going to be a win, and we were lucky enough that we were correct. So how we help developers actually deploy and maintain things on chain is trying to make all the tools that we build work across all of the chains in the same way, which is actually very hard to do, as you mentioned, because EVM compatibility isn't EVM equivalency. I really like that new term. So actually even, and I guess everyone else is going to have a better opinion than me on this, but when you deploy from one EVM chain to another, your smart contracts behave differently, your clients behave differently, and it's very important to streamline that.
Yeah, so maybe Yorke, can you give us a quick overview of how you are actually trying to make it easier to deploy on these different chains with Hyperlane?
Yeah, definitely. So hey guys, I'm Yorke. I work on Hyperlane, which is an interoperability protocol. And what that means is there's basically smart contract systems deployed on various chains which allow developers to pass messages, arbitrary messages, between contracts that exist on other chains. And so when they're deploying their applications, they're basically hooking up their deployments across each one of these chains to the Hyperlane protocol. And so we've had to deal with deploying these smart contract systems across a bunch of these chains ourselves. And in doing so, we've built out basically a bunch of our own kind of custom SDK and deployment tooling to facilitate this, mostly because a lot of the off-the-shelf tool chains like Foundry or Hardhat really don't have super native solutions. They don't really have native solutions for these sorts of like multi-chain deployments, especially when you have to keep track of addresses that like need to be configured on different chains. So you kind of like are parallelizing your deployment. And so yeah, we have basically built out like a TypeScript SDK, which provides like idempotency. Bogdan noted that kind of there's a lot of idiosyncrasies across what people describe as like EVM compatible networks that maybe don't actually share all the same opcodes or precompiles. And so like a lot of the time you encounter failure modes that are inconsistent across different chains. And like what we've done is created this like idempotent deployment tooling that allows you to resume from failures, which like saves you a lot of work when you're deploying across like 20 different networks. So that's just one feature, I guess.
Cool, thanks. So Rashid, maybe can you tell us why you chose to go omni-chain first, like directly, and how this makes your product really way better than other borrow lending protocols? And then we can jump into like what was hard about deploying that actually.
For sure, for sure. So hi everyone, my name is Rachin and I'm founder of Celo Finance. We are an omni-chain lending and borrowing protocol, and yeah, for us it made perfect sense to deploy on multiple chains first and go omni-chain right from the start because like if you see lending and borrowing protocols right now, what you can do is like say Aave or some other lending and borrowing protocol is deployed on Ethereum, right? And you can lend ETH there, and with that as collateral, you can only borrow within Ethereum within Ethereum chain, right? So what that does is it limits your borrowing power. Now, if you're suddenly able to lend in Ethereum and then borrow in any other chains that we support, it suddenly increases your borrowing purchasing power. And at the same time, when we do that, like if you see in Aave right now, they have the utilization rate of about 25% last time I checked. And that is because you're limiting the number of users that can use the protocol by the number of users in the chain that you support, right? So if you open the utilization of a liquidity pool across all the users, across all the chains, then you're increasing the probability of your liquidity pool being utilized in a much more efficient manner, and hence like a better functioning of a lending protocol. And yeah, that is exactly why we chose to go omni-chain first.
Cool, and like you're already live, right, on a bunch of EVM compatible chains, and you'll also be adding non-EVM compatible chains soon. Is that correct?
Right. So we are currently on testnet, going on mainnet very soon, and yeah, currently we support and we can support any EVM chains. And right now, as we speak, we're integrating apptos to open up our way for non-EVM chains as well.
So what was the most hard thing? Like how easy was it to just deploy on these EVM compatible chains? And then if that was easy, I don't know, how much harder is it to go into these other worlds like, you know, the Aptos or Cosmos or so ecosystem?
Right. So like honestly speaking, the deploying part for EVM chains, it wasn't that hard because thanks to Layer 0, we're using Layer 0 to pass messages across chain. So they make it very easy to deploy and like just plug. They have like a very good plug and play system, so very easy to deploy on EVM chains. And we didn't have to think about it a lot for like things like wallet integrations or anything for EVM chains because like users they usually have like same address for like EVM chains, right? But the problem goes in a much different level when you're trying to integrate non-EVM chains with EVM chains as well, right? Now you have to think about how do you like connect these two different wallet addresses for a single user, and like a lot of differences at infrastructure level. So yeah, it is I would say much harder to integrate EVM and non-EVM chains than like just EVM to EVM chains.
So Bogdan, is that the same experience that you make? Like where is the world vision for you? Like what chains do you want to be active on, and is it possible to be really an omni-chain dev tool which is present and working well on every chain, or do you have to limit yourself and deliver a great experience on a certain subset?
Yeah, I think it takes a lot of effort, and I think you're very much aware of that, to actually have this experience be completely streamlined everywhere. So what we actually did is we have our own custom EVM that we need to basically backport all of the differences between the opcodes, between the gas information, and a bunch of different things. So we internally can have these abstractions which are the same across all of the chains that we support. Now, when we look at it like an omni-chain developer tool, and this is especially for like hosted services like Tenderly, it gets harder and harder to onboard new chains as everybody's trying to do their own thing, kind of. Everybody says, again, EVM compatible, but suddenly there's this thing called the sequencer, and it's very important. Suddenly on Arbitrum, you have this invisible transaction on transaction index 0 on a block that nobody actually talks about, but is like very important when you're building the tool, and etc. So yeah, I guess it's hard, but I think we shouldn't use that as an excuse to build toys. We should make products that make people's lives easier. So yeah.
Got it. How do you think about that at Hyperlane, Yorke?
Yeah, so one of the features that we're the most excited about is this concept of permissionless deployment and permissionless interoperability, which is this idea that applications are going to want to be on infrastructure networks that we can't necessarily always support deploying on. But we're providing the tools for our developers and our customers to actually expand the Hyperlane protocol themselves. And obviously that implies kind of a whole host of security challenges. But the general idea is, we can, if we really believe in this multi-chain future, we're going to have, thousands of these chains that all have minute differences at the infrastructure layer, and we want to kind of create these abstractions that generalize, that allow developers to have consistent interfaces across chains. So like he alluded to, even the kind of identifiers of accounts across some of these newer VMs look very different than they do on the EVM. And so what we've done is tried to create these forwards compatible abstractions for how you can address contracts and accounts on these new VMs that maybe have are using different elliptic curve cryptography or those sorts of things. But in general, it's really hard to create an abstraction that captures all of the different VM designs.
Got it. So, Rachin, I'd be really interested to hear from you as a app developer. How do you prioritize between all these different chains that are around, right? I mean, usage is mostly centered still on Ethereum. So if you just look at that, it's kind of hard to make a move in any one specific direction. Do you mostly think about just going the path of least resistance and where you can, deploy the easiest way, or do you try to think ahead of where do you think the users will go, or what is your prioritization system essentially?
For now, especially for our launch, we're thinking of launching in only 3-4 chains, including all the as you said, high volume chains like Ethereum, Binance, BNB, and Polygon, Avalanche. So probably these 4. And yeah, there are a couple of reasons for choosing those. First is of course because all of them are EVM compatible, meaning we don't have to make a lot of changes to deploy on all of these chains. And at the same time, all of these are high volume chains, and we would want users to use our platform. It doesn't make sense for us to launch on a chain that doesn't have high volume instantly and then just be the protocol sitting there doing nothing, right? So we'd want to initially start out with all these high volume chains, gain user attraction there, and then after that, slowly expanding to all the chains that we can support. Our goal is to be able to be everywhere so that users don't have to think about what chain they are on whenever they're performing any DeFi transactions. So we're trying to create this layer of abstraction. As you said, everyone here is creating layer of abstraction for developers. We're trying to create a layer of abstraction for developers and users for liquidity part, right? Users don't have to think about if they're liquidity in one chain, they don't have to worry about how to perform transaction in other chains. So that is how we're thinking about it. Yeah.
Got it. And I mean, going a bit more into the technicalities, how is your tech stack looking like at the moment? I mean, what are you specifically using to deploy contracts, to surveil them, to connect in your front end, etc.? Because I mean, afterwards, I'd be interested to hear from you two guys which part of that stack, your app or tooling could replace or work more efficiently in. Rachin.
Sure. So for us, it was pretty simple. We didn't have to use any different stack at all. We just used this standard Solidity for EVM, and then Hardhat for deploying, and just Web3.js for connecting the front end. So pretty much the standard tech stack for Web3 applications. And the problem I think would arise when we are trying to integrate front end of our Aptos smart contracts. So yeah, would love to hear your guys' thoughts on that.
Yeah, I personally have a lot of thoughts here. Spent a lot of time thinking about this.
Tell us.
But yeah, if we do want to achieve this user experience of a user not knowing which chain they're on, but benefiting from the network effects of an application across a bunch of these different chains, where there's kind of this sharded liquidity, then we need to have applications which are architected in a different way. So the front end is going to basically require this global view of the application state across a bunch of these networks. And as a user, when you want to interact with that application, you're producing some signature. If we don't want the user to know which network they're on, they at least have to have some specified preference for like which chain they want to be on. Maybe it's like a fee preference or a finality preference, or a latency, or these sorts of underlying properties that like differentiate the infrastructure layers. But we still need to have some interface that allows users to understand the entire application state that's relevant to them if it is sharded across all these different chains. So yeah, we've been working on some SDK tooling. I mean, it's fairly like immature, I would say, just because we don't actually have a lot of people who are actually building applications in this sort of like forward-thinking architecture. But yeah, I do think we need to start to think about how the user interfaces need to adapt to the like multi-chain landscape.
So, Rachin, I mean, is your app still one front end for one chain, basically? Is it like whatever, Uniswap and all these others where you need to select which chain you want to transact on, and then that changes what RPC is being used in the background and what the wallet says and so on? Or do you have that vision of having one united front end for, the whole app?
So yeah, right now we have like Uniswap kind of thing, like where you can choose what network to be on. But yeah, eventually that is the goal. I think that comes down to like the other friends here, like building those kind of infrastructure about like users don't have to like select the networks they want to be on. Like right now, for example, in the Web2 world, we don't care about what server like Instagram is hosted on, right? Like we as a user, like we don't care like what blockchain we're on. We just want the best user experience and then the best profit out of it, I would say. So yeah, right now we are like the Uniswap kind of model, but eventually we'd hope to go to that direction with like total abstraction from the underlying blockchains.
Can I hijack for a second your
Of
role in
course.
this conversation? I just want the crowd to be aware how actually complex this is. Rachin kind of made it sound extremely simple. So can I ask you a couple of questions if you're okay with it? So while you mentioned that you plan on launching on, I think you mentioned Polygon, Avalanche, Ethereum Mainnet, and a couple of others. How were you testing for these chains?
Sorry, could you repeat that?
So how were you doing testing? So were you doing local forks? Were you deploying to testnets? How did you approach this issue?
So we were doing like local forks first, and then we deployed on their testnet, and then yeah. So first we did our internal testing, and then because we built our architecture from the ground up, right? Like it was not as easy as just forking Aave and then like adding multi-chain feature to it. So we had to build it from the ground up. So we had to test if this architecture would stand up, and so that's why we opened our test into the public like 3 months ago, and we processed like more than 200,000 transactions so far on testnet, and it hasn't broken so far. So I'd say the testing has been good so far, and yeah.
And how did you figure out it didn't break with 200,000 transactions? Like, do you monitor the application in some way? How do you know it's actually working?
So we check our it's a manual process right now. We check the transactions time and again, and also like the community feedback helps. Like if someone from from our community tells us like, hey, this is not working, we go to them. But unfortunately, that hasn't happened yet. So.
Okay, so we talked about only two things here, which was like local testing, and the second one was monitoring, basically, which was manual here. So take that, for example, you have to do that across, for example, 3, 4, 5 chains. So these two things suddenly become 10 things, actually, that you need to figure out. And this is why the multi-chain strategy is very important with what Hyperlane is doing, Layer 0, what we are doing, everything else, because you like imagine Rachin waking up each morning and then refreshing each Etherscan instance by hand to figure out if everything is working correctly, and then hard hit locally forking every network every time they want to do tests. So it's very important for us to invest as much as possible, because comparing it to Web 2, like people now mostly deploy to AWS GCP for some fucked up reason, Azure, and that's about it. And then you have Terraform, which figures it out. But we're gonna be in this like future where like you're deploying to thousands of things, as you mentioned, and it's going to be very important to streamline this whole thing. So yeah, sorry for hijacking. I just wanted the crowd to be aware of, like the complexity is exponential. It doesn't scale linearly with every chain that you onboard. It actually scales exponentially.
Totally agreed there.
Yeah, 100%. And also, like, I mean, how do you create these 200K transactions, right? I mean, how do you chaos
You
test
click.
essentially, right?
You
I mean,
click.
do you have users that you incentivize to be on testnet, and hint hint, maybe at some point there's an airdrop or something, because right, Tenderly is being used to automate all of that and to really go not only into the, let's say, normal state, where maybe 95% of the time you're in, right, the two sigmas, but into the extreme state. So maybe could you tell us a little bit how you can use Tenderly to really like stress test and go into the limits of depths to see, whether they also work there?
Sure. At this point, I'm joking both on Twitter and in person here at the event that our goal is for girly ETH not to have any value, because I think it's extremely dumb that people are paying, but that we ended up in a situation where you need to pay to test things. Anyway, sorry, this is a pet peeve of mine and I get triggered. So anyway, how people actually use Tenderly for these things is we have something called cloud forks. So just as Racine, when he's working, he can use Hardhit locally to fork a network. You can basically just pick any network that we support, which is I think most of the EVM chains, except Celo, hint hint, we can have a conversation later. But yeah, anyway, so basically, they pick any network that we support. They get an RPC link, which is completely malleable. So you can impersonate anyone. You can even change the source code of a smart contract to see how it would behave. You can even fork your own fork, which, to be honest, not as many people use as we thought. It felt very cool to code the thing, but it is like, I guess, too advanced. But then you can basically do fuzz testing, integration testing. You can pop it into your UI and test it out like a staging area. So people basically use this together with Foundry or Hardware, whatever, connect it to a Tenderly fork, and then do a bunch of transactions to actually figure out if it's behaving like it should. And again, you don't have to even leak your code to a testnet, because I mean, you don't verify it on Etherscan, but you still end up in this situation where the bytecode is there. So yeah, that's basically how people use it.
Yeah, again, this is like super exciting for me because this is like what I'm thinking about all the time. But yeah, Hyperlane's vision for like the long-term future of this like developer experience is being the Kubernetes for Web3. So basically having like this horizontal scaling abstraction for developers to say, okay, I actually want to spin up my application on this new chain because it's providing some liquidity benefits, or it's providing some new property that's been unlocked by like, the R&D happening at the L1 or roll-up layer. But I have this existing network effect in my application that I want to kind of migrate to this new, environment, cloud environment. And so you want to create those tools for people to scale up and down their application, do, load testing on these like testnet environments. And I think like we're really far away from that being the reality, but I think like if we do want to realize these sorts of like super heterogeneous infrastructure like trade-offs, then we do need to come up with these sorts of abstractions for developers.
So going back to the stack and the stack question, and where is the omni-chain part in the stack being built? So if you think about, hey, the front end, there's only one front end for everything, for every chain. Then what about the wallet? Is there only one wallet for every chain? And then is there like only one JS SDK for every chain? And can you like have everything in like a single chain, development environment, and only have Hyperlane, which connects at the very lowest level of the stack into all these different L1s and L2s? Is that like the final state that you envision, or does the whole stack basically, or a large part of it, have to become cross-chain?
You made me anxious. You made me anxious by the amount of work you just explained and the amount of human years that are going to be invested. So yeah, I guess this is a question more for you.
Yeah. So fantastic question. I think what we want is for the developer experience, the wallet experience. We want all these interfaces to be kind of like as backwards compatible as possible to minimize the churn required on all these like layers of abstraction that sit above something like Hyperlane. And so, for example, like we've come up with basically some tooling where you can actually use the Hyperlane messaging system to basically describe intent to deploy these contracts across a bunch of different chains. So yeah, you start to get to this architecture where you maybe have like a single interface for the developer. on one chain and maybe a single interface for users on like maybe on your app chain. But then Hyperlane is actually this connective tissue across all of the different like L2s or L1s that are providing basically like the interoperability to these other applications that you need to like maybe bootstrap your growth as an application. I think like it's very hard to get wallets to adopt any sort of like new standard. Wallet Connect is doing some great work on like pushing forward kind of some of this multi-chain tooling. But I think in general, like we haven't really as a ecosystem and community like come to consensus on like what the right abstractions are. So it's definitely like fast evolving.
Okay, great answer. And now we only have like 2.5 minutes left. So what I want to do is like look up into the future and ask you guys, what is your most contrarian view of how this multi-chain ecosystem will evolve, right? We've been talking for years about it, and for years everybody was just saying multi-chain is happening. That was like the thing everybody was very aligned on. What is you as experts in the space, where are you diverging from like mainstream thought?
So it has to be contrarian, correct?
Yeah, ideally. I mean,
Well,
if you're just mainstream, that's cool too.
No, cool. So February 3rd, 2025, when we sit together again here, I fear that we're going to have the literally same conversation that we're having right now. This was the thing that happened with wallet UX. This is the thing with that, like, there are these topics that we are constantly revisiting, and we just feel nice about ourselves talking about them. I'm actually very happy that multi-chain is happening now. But if we think about it, we always think about Uniswap or whichever. We talk about 20 different projects. Like all the others, the most multi-chain they get is deploying to a testnet and then the mainnet of that network. And we're using 2 chains, you're not. Anyway, so my contrarian thoughts are that the abstractions are going to be there, but it's still a long way for people to actually adopt them. And sorry for this pessimistic outlook. It was pessimistic, not contrarian, but yeah.
Should I go ahead? Okay.
Yeah, I can go real quick. So I think one of the biggest interesting trade-offs between like multi-chain future is like this idea of like async versus atomic composability. And actually, I think there's like a lot of complexity imposed on the application developer to like think about this like async composability system. Obviously, like I have my own opinions about like, I believe in like kind of this multi-chain thesis and like interoperability between app chains. But I do think that, well, I don't know if it's contrarian. I guess I believe in async composability. I think like a lot of people who are like Ethereum maxis maybe don't believe in that. And there's like some cool research of people who are working on like atomic composability between rollups. But I don't really believe in that. So yeah, that's my contrarian take.
Got it. Rachin?
Yep, totally agreeing with what other fellows said. Yeah, like it will be hard to achieve like async. Sync, it will be hard to achieve the synchronized composability across chains because it's fundamentally 2 different systems, and it's going to be hard to do that. And my I don't know if it's contrarian, but my view is that once we have a lot of these infrastructural side figured out, I think that a lot of these like legacy protocols like Uniswap, Aave, a lot of these protocols that deny to go cross-chain, omni-chain, multi-chain, whatever you call it, it's going to be hard for them to survive, especially with the new protocols coming up because they have access to all the users across all the chains without having to know about the blockchains they're residing on. It is just like a new generation of protocol, and it's going to be hard for them to move to that because it's like they're too big to like make drastic changes, and they have to be very cautious about it. So I'm very interested to see that happen.
Okay, thanks a lot, Rachin, Yorke, Bogdan. Thanks a lot for coming and having this discussion. And I'm already reserving the same spot 5 years in the future, and so we can have the same discussion again. Huh?
Cool. And a big round of applause for Matthew. He was an amazing MC, so a huge round of applause to him.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.